1 minute.
He turned the car on in the garage, and my fucking porn came through the Bluetooth.
Masker. I heard Dean Blundell smokes crack. Was actually the first to smoke it with Rob Ford, I heard, too.
What's Dean got to do with it? Frankly, my dear, I don't give a Dean.
States rated R for, restricted and for a little bit romantic.
What do we got?
What is that in the background?
What is that over there by the mic?
Is he making wallets?
What
is he doing?
What's he doing?
It looks like he's... Never mind.
What's he doing? What? Is he dead?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Let's start right out. Hey, what happened?
There you go. Welcome to the show. My name is Dean. Let's get to it. We're really happy today to welcome to the program someone who probably doesn't need much of an introduction. He's been called a global gadfly, constitutional lawyer, which is actually what he was trained to do. He's a pundit. He's a journalist. He's a shit disturber. I'm sure you go by many names. Please welcome Mr. Glen Greenwald, everybody. Glen Greenwald is here. Am I the only one clapping for Glen? Come on, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I need more applause. All right, that's an okay amount, but I think it's enough to start with.
A smattering of
It's
applause.
COVID. It's COVID, Glenn. We'll get the fake stuff piped in here sooner than later, though.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
Thanks for doing this, Glenn. You're also a dog owner, and I see a dog behind you. Is it true you have 24 dogs? Is that true?
It's false. We have 26. And it's funny. We've been like kind of collecting, rescuing dogs, whatever you want to call them. And a lot of times when my husband and I go out for dinner and the subject of dogs come up, which it often does, people like to talk about it. And then people ask us, how many dogs do you have? And we say, oh, we have 26. We always have to remind ourselves to ease people into that because we know it sounds completely insane to the vast majority of people.
Just a
like
little.
I think you're some kind of like bizarre dog hoarder or whatever. So like sometimes we forget and we're like, yeah, we have 26 as though it's the most normal thing in the world. And then we have to explain like, no, we don't have like a compulsion. We just love dogs. We like rescue them. But we finally opened a shelter because I think my husband was going to divorce me if I picked up one more dog. So we have a shelter where they all go now.
Okay, good. Yeah, and what's interesting is that it's not just a shelter. It's like a shelter that you employ homeless people to come and work at to be able to help street animals, right?
Awesome.
Like it's kind of it's one hand that feeds the other. It's an incredible story, actually.
Yeah, I became like very fixated on the relationship between homeless people and their homeless dogs and the way they live together on the street because there's a lot of them in Rio de Janeiro. I've always lived in cities and noticed, I've lived in Rio for 15 years, that there's a much greater dog population living with homeless people than in other cities I've lived in. And the more I talked to them, the more I started realizing that the bond between homeless people and their dogs is so much more profound because, most people who have dogs, if you have a middle-class existence, you also have, a spouse or a girlfriend or boyfriend, kids, a job, a house, things. Whereas people who live on the street, they have their dog and their dog has them and that's all they have. And so like the loyalty and love they have for one another is unlike anything I've encountered. And so the idea of the shelter was kind of to try and tap into that energy by employing homeless people who live on the street who are already taking care of dogs to work and help them get off the street by helping them manage income and the like. So yeah, it's designed to help both populations.
Yeah, it's a great story. I was reading about the help that you've been in the community around you to the animals and the people. So you can add that. You've got an altruistic streak that runs down the middle of you. You're a journalist. Can't figure you out. Don't know if you're right. Don't know if you're left. I know that you are absolutely 100% committed to the truth. And listen, we like to put things in normative cultural boxes, right? Like I grew up with news being news. You could believe the news. And now 2021 doing what we do, we're a para news organization, I guess, if you will, hyper focused on the truth. I was introduced to you a while back by James. And I said to James before we did this interview, what is he? What is Glen Greenwald? So can you answer that question? Might be a great way to start the interview.
Declan actually says on our chat here, Glenn, before you explain yourself, he's referring to you as a savage.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, the question is a savage what, right? That's what
Yeah.
you're asking. Like, I think everyone accepts that adjective for me. The question then becomes like, what's the noun that follows? You know, I think a lot of the confusion has to do with how I started writing about politics and doing journalism. So, you know, I didn't go to journalism school. I didn't go to Columbia College and study journalism, so it never ruined me. I never wanted to go to work for the New York Times or like, you know, NBC News. That was never an aspiration of mine. I was working as a constitutional lawyer, as you referenced, and I really just wanted to be part of the political conversation that I felt like after 9/11 was lacking a lot of focus on things that deserve more attention. And so I just one day created a blog in late 2005, and I had no plans for it. I didn't think it was going to become a career. It was certainly no financial model for me. It was just driven by this passion of things I wanted to get people to pay more attention to that they weren't paying attention to previously. And so I never had to do anything that I didn't want to do. I never had to say anything I didn't believe because it wasn't my, you know, livelihood. It wasn't the way that I was earning a living. And so then once I developed a large readership and was able to start doing it full time, I never abandoned that. Like I knew that if it ever became a job for me where I was captive to one faction or, you know, imprisoned by a particular dogma and was no longer able to say the things that I believed or to say what I thought was true and false, it would just, the passion would be drained out of me and I would just become another job. And I have a lot more ways to make money if that's been trying to be a journalist. Like, you don't go into journalism today. I've always done it just for the conviction, passion, and the fulfillment it gives me, and that always came from the independence that I think is that's constructive.
I think I like that you're on right now too, because we're living in these polarized times where I've seen people, even when we were promoting the fact that you were going to be on the show, we had people from the left, and I know they were from the left because they had pronouns in their Twitter bios, right? And they were telling us that we were, you know, betraying some progressive idealism because you were coming on the show because you appeared on Fox News. And I feel like you're like this poster child for conviction and principles, and how when you just conviction and principles in a polarized state, then they'll just try something because you're not saying the right words that the tribe says. And I know that you recognize that that happens because it's been happening to you for years. But how does it make you feel like about what's going on?
You know, I think a lot of what we end up doing in life has to do with our personality type, which in turn is formed by experiences we've had in childhood. So for whatever reason, I was just always a person that enjoyed debate, argument, conflict, confrontation. I'm sure that's a huge surprise to all of you. And, you know, that carries over till today. So, you know, it's like, on some level, I do think that the function of a journalist or a polemicist or anyone who's just trying to keep society honest is to make people uncomfortable. This dogma, these pieties and orthodoxies in a way that they constantly get affirmation for, and they cease analyzing whether they are true, whether they're being self-critical. And so I think you constantly need people poking and prodding and challenging and questioning and confronting. And obviously when you do that, you aren't necessarily going to be popular because the people to whom you're doing it, the factions that you've decided need challenging, generally aren't going to appreciate that. And you need to be willing to, you know, endure a lot of hostility, a lot of critique. But as long as you feel like you have the integrity in what you're doing, at least for me, I feel like I can pretty much withstand any of that. And sometimes I feel like it's vindication, right? So if I am in a war with the US government over NSA reporting and they're threatening to imprison me, of course, it can create some anxiety, but it can also it can be very gratifying. You know, it's like, well, if they want to imprison me, it must mean that I'm doing something that's very disturbing to them, which I feel like is my role. So it all depends a lot. Look at the feedback you're getting and the backlash that you're provoking. And for me, it's just always something that I've sought out rather than tried to avoid.
Are you a shit disturber? Are you a provoker, or are you just looking for truth? I guess because that's what people would ask, right? Depending on what side of the fence that you lean towards.
Yeah, motivation. Yeah.
Right. Like what is your motivation to do what you do? Because, I was saying before when we had you on and we were trying to figure out the tech issues, and I don't think you heard it because, but like I was watching a scene in Snowden the other day where Zachary Quinto, who, by the way, you look enormously like, it's really weird.
I mean, I'm a little better looking than he is. He's a little older than I am, but in general, we do have a resemblance.
Yeah, big time. But I was watching this scene where, and I don't know if there's any truth to it, where you're going back and forth in the hotel room with Edward Snowden, Laura Poitras, and a reporter from The Guardian. And you're basically standing up to the editor at The Guardian on a call, and you're screaming, if you don't get this shit out by 4 o'clock, I'm going to do it my fucking self. And I thought to myself, this guy has the biggest balls out of anyone I've ever heard, because the woman on the other end she was like telling you, Glenn, listen, I'm dealing with the White House. I'm dealing with the FBI. Just give me a minute. But everyone I know does anything that you do would have said, oh, okay, well, we'll just wait. You didn't. I don't know if that scene is true or if they embellished it, but like, is that really you? Is that really how you carry yourself?
I mean, they cleaned it up a little bit. Like I think they made in fact, Oliver Stone purposely sought out a gay actor because I think he wanted to in that scene particularly make it a little drama queen vibe. But in general, it was pretty accurate. Remember I had flown across the world from Rio de Janeiro to Hong Kong to meet with, although I didn't know at the time until I met him, a 29-year-old kid who had essentially made the choice to unravel his entire life. We were 98% sure when we were working with Snowden that he was going to end up spending the rest of his life in prison. I saw almost no possibility that he would be able to evade or elude the grip of the United States, the most on the planet, given that he had just handed to us the biggest leak in American national security history, an archive of hundreds of thousands of, if not more, of the most sensitive documents from the most secretive agency of the world's most powerful government. And I felt an obligation to him to do justice to his sacrifice. And he purposely sought me out for exactly that reason. He was afraid that if he had gone to the New York Times or the Washington Post or some more established outlet that was accustomed to maintaining an amiable relationship with the United States government and the security state and thought that that was important, that they were going to end up in endless negotiations where they would be taking orders from the government about what they could and couldn't publish, that maybe they would publish a couple of stories and then the government would say, okay, you've had your fun, you'll win a Pulitzer, now it's time to go do something else. And he felt it was critical that, number one, we defy the government and be willing to publish all of the stories until the very end. But even more importantly, that we created a climate where we said, we're not going to be scared. We're not going to be intimidated. We know that what we're doing is right. And a big part of the story from his perspective and then mine was not so much the revelations about surveillance, but the role of journalism in a democracy, the idea that it's journalists who shine a light on those people in power, and the people in power don't dictate to you how you do that. And so I knew it was very important from the very beginning, since I was working with The Guardian, which was an established institution with lawyers and editors and 200 years of history, to say to them, the energy from the start has to be one of defiance, not one of subservience or acquiescence or fear. And so I'm not going to tolerate, a week or 2 weeks of endless, negotiation with the U.S. government about what we are and aren't allowed to publish. I'm not going to allow you to prolong this and delay it and let the government find us and find Snowden and prevent us from doing the work. This story is ready. It's a story that the public has the absolute right to know. I don't give a shit what the government thinks about it. And if you do, that's fine. You can spend all your time talking to the White House if you want. I'll just go elsewhere and take the story elsewhere and publish it by myself if I have to on a newly created site. And it did put the editor-in-chief of The Guardian in the U.S. in a difficult position, because the editor-in-chief of The Guardian from London was on a plane, unreachable, flying to New York to oversee the process. And so her two choices were publish the story without his permission, pissing him off and the White House, who was threatening prosecution, or lose what was obviously the biggest story in journalism in a decade, if not a generation, because she was too afraid to, give the go-ahead to publish. And I knew she was in that difficult position, and I exploited that on purpose by threatening her with losing the story because I knew that that was the only way that I could force her to take the plunge. And, at the end, I don't want to make her sound like a coward. She really wanted to. She was, a very brave editor who stood by the work the whole time, but she was in a very difficult position with that first story because, you're talking to the US government and they're telling you if you publish these stories, there's going to be blood on your hands. That's what they do. They say you're going to be telling the terrorists how we spy on them. You're going to be making us go dark on the people we're tracking in Al Qaeda. And the next terrorist attack is going to be on your conscience and on your head. And that's what they do. And it's not easy to say, fuck off. But at the end of the day, that's the obligation you have when you get your hands on a story like this.
Speaking of fear, and I hope this isn't jumping too far ahead here, but at any point, Glenn, were you concerned about your safety or Snowden's? That might be a dumb question.
Yeah. I mean, there's scenes in, the film Citizen 4, you had mentioned the film that was done by Oliver Stone, the fiction film, but the documentary that was produced by Laura Poitras that won the Oscar for Best Documentary, the reason it was so compelling was because she turned on the camera from the first second I started working with Snowden. And so all that footage of the first 9 days we worked together in that Hong Kong hotel room was real. And you can see in all that footage that when the phone rang, if it was just housekeeping, asking if they could come in and clean the room because Snowden hadn't let them in for weeks and it was smelling. And there was like room service trays piled up, or, at one point there was a fire alarm that went off. We were, on the verge of like a certain kind of paranoia because we didn't know how much the US government knew about what we were doing. We didn't know if Chinese authorities knew what we were doing. We didn't know if local Hong Kong police or intelligence agencies knew what we were doing, or if some other intelligence agencies knew what they were doing and wanted to get their hands on that archive, which of course they would have. So we very much were, believing that our time was very limited, that at any moment there was going to be not a knock on the door, but, people kicking that door down to take Snowden away, which of course they would have done had they discovered what we were doing. So yeah, there was a very thick tension, obviously, from the very first moment we started working together until the time we finally separated.
Attached to that must be an adrenaline, though. Like, because I worked as a freelancer. I have done things that are small time compared to what you've done, and even in those small stunts, like voting multiple times in an election to show how our electoral law was. There's this adrenaline when there's a guy parked outside my house that I can't deny. You know what I mean? Like it was fun. So I'm just wondering how much, do you feel almost schizophrenic because you're paranoid on one hand, on the other hand, you must be jacked with adrenaline.
Totally. That's why you go into journalism, right? Is to do stories like this. And I mean, of course, you have to enjoy those moments, right? Those are the moments in life that ultimately shape who you are and what you leave for the world. And if you obsess on the dangers, you become paralyzed with fear. And you have to kind of find the humor in it. And it was kind of amazing that we were in Hong Kong, a city that has absolutely no connection to the US security state. And we were publishing stories. They had no idea where we were, that were shaking the world. They were, severing diplomatic relations between countries. And it was impossible for me to sleep, even with narcotics. I would take the strongest, tranquilizers or sleeping pills in the world, and I still was sleeping 90 minutes. Because why the fuck would I sleep? I had I wanted to keep publishing documents and keep the NSA just on their heels, scared and unable to get off the canvas and start to counterattack. Plus, it was, I had been writing about the NSA for years. I had been warning that the NSA was spying on the internet and engaging in surveillance far more broadly and invasively than the law permitted or that we knew. But it was so difficult to prove that because of how opaque they are. And finally, in my hands, I had all the proof. And so all I wanted to do, was publish those documents. And there was an immense amount of gratification and fun dropping those stories, in the what was, say, if we were 12 hours with a time difference on the East Coast of the US. So a story would get published at 8 in the morning in the US. It would be 8 at night in Hong Kong, and they would spend all night in TV studios giving TV interviews around the world. And then I would go back to Snowden's room, and he would be sitting on his bed watching, the shitstorm that he created on the BBC and on CNN and on just media outlets all over the world. And I remember the third day I came back to the hotel, and it was right next to this office building that had like neon headlines that were going around in English. And it had, when we finally like unveiled Snowden, it had a huge picture of Snowden on the Hong Kong side of the building with like the headlines, NSA whistleblower reveals himself. And I went up to the elevator and met with him. And that's when I knew like what the magnitude of the story was.
Plus, you had all that leverage too. Sorry, Dean, but you had all that leverage as well. Like you had this treasure trove of stories, and that drip drab way that you leaked them. Like you didn't give the entire story over to the Guardian, right? You just gave them, okay, this is what you're going to publish next, and this is what you're going to publish next, and the New York Times the same thing. Or did you give them the entire treasure trove at the beginning?
No. I knew if I gave the archive to anybody, we would lose the leverage, right? And I wanted to make sure that nobody had the ability to determine how that story was done other than myself and Laura Poitras. We never gave the full archive to anybody. I did stories with NBC News, with the biggest media outlets all over the world, with Le Monde in France, with Globo in Brazil. They all wanted the archive. Just said, fuck you. And as you said, I had the leverage. I had the biggest story in the world. And so I set the terms for how it was done. And it wasn't until like 2015 when we finally gave a copy of the archive to somebody with the Intercept, to the media outlet Laura and I had co-founded with Jeremy Scahill. But until that point, for the first 2 years, we were the only ones with the copy.
Okay. Does that at any point in time, like, after the excitement wears off and you're going up to his hotel room and you realize how huge this story is and the professional development that goes into in the professional moment that you're having, right? At any point in time, did you go, okay, now I'm waiting for the wave of FBI questions, interviews, guys in hats showing up to my door? Take us through, the moment of exhilaration to the process after, where you're probably on a few lists, right? Like you got to be.
Yeah, I mean, I had been working with WikiLeaks for a long time, and with Anonymous, I'd been covering them. I'd been working with them. I actually did a story about a year before Snowden contacted us about Laura Poitras having been on a watch list because she had done a documentary film that was Oscar nominated about the Sunni Triangle at the height of the Iraq War. And there were claims that she had filmed a Sunni terrorist attack on U.S. forces because she had advanced knowledge. So she was put on a list, an actual list. So I knew, working with her as well, that was all likely. I think it all kind of hit me. The very unusual component of the story was that from the very first moment Snowden contacted me, unlike sources that leak national security information to you and are committing crimes, who say, I need you to do everything to protect my identity, they don't want to be found out, obviously. Snowden always said from the start, he wants to come forward. He wants to be identified. He felt an ethical obligation not to hide, but to come forward and say, you don't need to look for me, motherfuckers. I'm right here. My name's Edward Snowden, Edward Joseph Snowden. I'm the one who provided them with all this information, and here's why.
Yeah.
So, a big part of what we had to do from the very beginning was not just plan the journalistic strategy, but also the media strategy. And I didn't want to unveil him too early because I felt like that would take the focus off of the revelations. But I didn't want to do it too late either because I was worried that they would find him first. I didn't want to be forced into that. I wanted it to be clear that he was doing it voluntarily. It was such an act of like, fuck you defiance, right? Like, you don't need to come looking for me. Here's who I am. I knew that was a critical moment. And so once we did that, I with him on camera where he unveiled himself, that was actually the first time that the international media discovered that we were in Hong Kong. I had been doing interviews on the condition that they not say where I was. So everybody discovered, so the entire world descended on Hong Kong, and they couldn't find him, but they knew they found my hotel room. And I woke up at like 7 a.m. to go out to do an interview. And there was an enormous horde of media, as well. And, wanting to speak with me. They followed upstairs to the elevator. I held on the hotel. And obviously they wanted to know where Snowden was, and I wasn't going to, I think I ended up leaving Hong Kong about 8 days later. And my plan was to Brazil by going from Hong Kong to New York, and then New York.
Did we
I flew back through Dubai back to Rio, and I wasn't able to leave Brazil for the next year because the government was so threatening.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, the bravery that goes into that kind of reporting, because, you know, that's one thing to think of, oh, I've got a big story, I'm going to pump it out and we're going to get a ton of clicks, or we're going to get a ton of views. This will be good for everybody professionally. This is why I'm in this gear. This is why I do this job. But you know, we don't think about, or no one talks about, all the other unsettling shit that comes with, you know, being, and I use this in the promo, being a lodestar like that, like being someone that has the ability to say, you know what, fuck the world, literally fuck the world, and every outcome that we're used to, every cultural norm, I'm going to break it. And I found that fascinating, how public you were, not just with him, but how public you were with you and the work you were doing. And I wonder if that probably went a long way to protecting you at some point too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we hear about the pressure that I was putting on the Guardian to get the stories published, and stories, it would reduce our risk that we were incurring by working in secret in a Hong Kong hotel room. I felt like the more quickly we made it clear that we had an important journalistic story that we were reporting, the more difficult it would be to depict us as criminals or as spies or as, you know, people engaged in espionage trying to, you know, transfer information to the Chinese government. And so I thought it was very important to come as possible, be as public as possible, and appear in the media all the time, defending what we were doing, explaining what we were doing, making clear to the public why they should know about this and they should care about this, if for no other reason than as protection.
I have a question that I think I'm not sure how you're going to answer, because clearly you do this and you go after the truth based on your own sort of idea in your mind about what people need to know. But is there ever a point where you felt that it was too much? Not so much for yourself, but for the general public. Because I kind of I've lived myself in this bubble, and it's a protectionism thing. I mean, I've had conversations with people about 9/11, and I always say the same thing. I can't dig into that. I can't live in a world where there's even the remote possibility that the government had a hand in killing 3,000 of its own citizens. Like, and that's me. That's the world. That's my shelter that I put around myself. Have you ever thought about that and what it is, the reporting that you do, and the impact it has on your readership?
Yeah, I definitely, you know, I definitely think about that. I think it's very important, if you want to be an effective journalist, always to be thinking about how the audience is processing, connecting to, understanding, and reacting to the information you're presenting. Because ultimately journalism is not like art or poetry, right? Like you can write a beautiful poem or paint a beautiful painting. It doesn't matter if anyone sees it. It's still a beautiful work of art. Maybe it'll be discovered 200 years from now. Maybe it won't. I don't see journalism that way. I view the value of journalism solely as a function of the change it fosters in society. And that's why, you know, I know a lot of journalists who are really good journalists who write really good investigative articles, but they're not very good at making people care. They're not good at making people pay attention to it. Maybe they think they're above that. Maybe they're just not skillful at that. And so they publish these brilliant, long, important exposés that nobody reads and therefore makes no difference. And I don't think that's good journalism. I think it's shitty journalism. So I think a lot about what my relationship is with the public and the readership that I'm writing to. And in that Snowden story, for example, you know, as I said, my strategy was to kind of do a shock and awe, just like drop a bomb every day for at least, you know, 8-9 straight days, to prevent the government from figuring out what was going on and to let them start counterattacking. And then after the fourth story we did, I had people in the ACLU and like other, you know, digital advocacy groups writing to me saying, please, I haven't slept in like 4 days because of these stories. I can't process anymore. I can't take it. It's too much. You've got to slow down. And I figured, like, well, if they're not even able to process it, like, probably the public needs more time to digest this as well. And so I always calibrated, what I was doing and which countries I would choose to partner with media outlets in, and what reporting I did in which countries, based on sort of the timing of things and politics. And yeah, I mean, at some point, you want to make sure that you're not driving people insane, right? You want to empower people to react. You don't want to burden them with psychological difficulties. And a lot of the information I had was extremely disturbing and sensitive. And, we made a lot of choices and constantly tried to balance what our ethical responsibilities were with the right of the public to know, with the fact that certain things if published could endanger people or cloud public perception. And these are very complicated judgments that we were trying to navigate all the time.
If we could just shift gears a little bit, because obviously we're up in Canada. We got to see the Donald Trump show for the last 4 years. How much of a disruptive force was he in journalism? Because I remember, when the Iraq war was happening, you could take an MSNBC or an NBC and get some critical journalism against George W. Bush. And then when Trump took over, it was like James Clapper and all these guys that were part of like the military intelligence complex or whatever that's called, all becoming these pundits. And these were the very people that the journalists who were interviewing them were criticizing their outfits and their agencies before Trump got into office. And it was a weird shift. It was like a swap of loyalties. And I was just wondering, because I've heard you speak before about how MSNBC especially is employing all of these people who are basically criminals. A lot of them should be in prison. And what did that do to journalism and the landscape?
I mean, Trump completely broke the brains of the vast majority of American journalists, and not just journalism, but other political sectors as well, because they had almost like a hysterical nervous breakdown about his election. In part, it was understandable because everybody on whom we rely to tell us what to expect about how the world is going to evolve was assuring us, based on data and statistics and all these soft sciences that we've come to be convinced are reliable, that the chances that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president were close to 100%. There were times when the New York Times and other media outlets had their probability charts at 97 or 98% predicting her victory. And so just him winning alone upended an enormous amount of psychological security, because when you stop trusting the things on which you rely for understanding the world, it creates an enormous amount of insecurity. It would almost be like if tomorrow you woke up and the law of gravity ceased to be applicable to the earth and you were, instead of wedded to the ground, floating in midair along with other objects. You would be extremely disoriented, because one of the central ways that you understand the world and come to have an expectation about its predictability has been unraveled. That was very much true for Trump's victory, very, very unexpected victory over Hillary Clinton that I think we shouldn't underestimate. But the bigger part of it was that we have this kind of iconography about what the American presidency is. It's the image and symbol of American power and American greatness and American benevolence. And it doesn't really matter what ideology a particular candidate runs on. There's certain behavioral and comportmental requirements that they all have to assume in order to maintain an image of what the United States is in the world, which Trump, in every single case, either had complete contempt for or a complete inability to uphold. And so they convinced themselves that Trump was this like radical aberration from the American tradition, that he was an existential threat to everything Americans hold dear, and that he was genuinely a fascist threat. They started actually literally comparing him to like Adolf Hitler. And that produced a psychosis in the minds of journalists and the people who listen to that sector of journalism. And they adopted this very primitive binary view of the world, where the entire world was understood only through a simplistic prism of pro-Trump or anti-Trump.
Right.
And anybody who was anti-Trump And anything that was said in service of undermining Trump, they started venerating. So the CIA, the FBI, Bush Cheney war criminals, the biggest scumbags on the planet who are, fraudsters and grifters and live off DC sleaze, corporate media outlets that have long been distrusted, anybody who expressed any amount of opposition to Trump, they embraced as their allies, and they didn't transform those people when they did it. Those people transformed them. And as a result, the reality was very different the whole time. Trump was an incredibly weak president. He didn't really give a shit about governing. He had no interest in policy. He had no ability to follow through on the only thing actually unusual about the Trump presidency were his press conferences and his tweets, which, were kind of disruptive because it gave people like an outlet. Like a lot of people despise the media. And so to have the president saying the media is the enemy of the people felt so cathartic to so many people. And that was menacing to these institutions, that you had somebody encouraging people, giving license to them to express their real views. But on like the policy level of foreign policy and economic policy, it was very much a continuation of what had come before it. And I think Trump was much more a symptom of American pathology than a cause of it. But what he enabled them to do was to like whitewash everything that happened beforehand. So they created this, they revitalized this mythology of American exceptionalism. We were always such a noble country that lived under the rule of law. We had honest leaders, even when we disagreed with them politically. They fucking revitalized George W. Bush. Polls show that Democrats overwhelmingly approve and think positively of George W. Bush.
Because he's a good painter.
He's a painter, and he made clear that he doesn't like Trump.
Yeah.
So he instantly got rehabilitated. Like, forget those war crimes, those rendition things, the torture stuff, the destruction of Iraq, like all of that got forgotten.
Yeah.
And the media, devoted itself, it completely abandoned any journalistic pretense. They adopted for themselves the phrase resistance, which that shows you like how delusional they were. That's taken from the extremely brave, French fighters who confronted the Nazi occupation of Vichy France during World War II. They saw themselves that way, like on the front line of this dangerous existential battle. And when you convince yourself that you're fighting Hitler, anything and everything becomes justified. So they, constantly were publishing lies that they got from the CIA. They were aligning with the worst people on the planet. And I think that the opposition to Trump ended up doing far more damage to American political life and political culture and American democracy than Trump himself even got close to being able to do.
I have a theory on your sleep issues that you mentioned earlier, Glenn. It might be your brain.
It's too big for you. And listen, you brought up a couple of points and mistrust. Like, I come back to censorship and mistrust. We're dealing with a bill up here called C-10 in Canada, where the government wants to, I'm sure you've heard of it, the government wants to limit the amount of free speech on social media, and they want to make it subject to the CRTC. Yeah, they do. And the subject to the CRTC. So, they've walked that back today, but that's censorship, right? You're talking about media censorship, where people and big media are creating narratives and censoring people and creating narratives and using catchphrases. And it's not just the left. It's not just Fox News. It's not just CNN. Everybody seems to be doing it. So the question is to put into practice this conversation in the lives of people who are actually listening to this, because a lot of people ask me this and I'm like, fuck, I don't know. I'll ask Glen Greenwald. He probably knows way more than me. Who are we trusting for news now? Like, where are we going? Because I see you, and I pointed this out as a lodestar of someone who just, listen, I want the facts, only the facts. Everybody's guilty of the same shit they accuse the other people of. But to the average human being who, just walked in, put their cards on, put their keys in the bowl by the door, and they're coming really excited to watch the news. Who are we watching? How do we get news? I tell people to research, but news isn't news like we thought news was back then, right? Or was it? Have we all been snowed this whole time? Because, reading you, studying you, going through the motions of this past year, where I know big media is in it with the government. That's how it works up here. It's Bell and Rogers that are trying to fuck over the average Canadian. It's not the government, but they're all in bed. It makes mistrust the order of the day. And what people are having a hard time doing, Glenn, is they're having a hard time figuring out what is the news. Where do I go for objective information? What is the ruthless truth about the subject that I'm interested in? And how do we do that? What do you say to people? And it's like, fuck, well, if I can't watch any of these news channels and they're all lying to me, what am I watching?
So I'll tell you what my trajectory on that question was. So before I started writing about politics in 2005, as we mentioned, I was, a constitutional lawyer. I didn't really have much of an interest in politics before that. It was like during the 90s, everything seemed low stakes in the US politics. The Soviet Union had fallen, the Cold War was over. The big issues of the Clinton administration of the 90s were Monica Lewinsky's blowjobs in the White House and like Paula Jones. And like in 1996, Bill Clinton ran against fucking Bob Dole, like some old
Bob Dole,
gray. Yeah, Bob Dole. Like, who gives a shit, right? So I was more interested in like building my law practice as a constitutional lawyer. I was, in my late 20s in New York. So I had a lot going on in my life and I didn't really care about politics. And it was only after 9/11 when I really started thinking things had gone wrong. And, what happened was when I was living in New York as a lawyer, I was, a professional. I was educated. So I subscribed to the New York Times. I had a subscription to the Atlantic and the New Yorker. I read the New York Times every day. I read those magazines each week. I assumed that I was consuming high-end news and therefore was getting like the basic, educated, intelligent story about what was happening in the political world, even if it wasn't perfect. And when I began writing about politics and built an audience quickly and was able to do it full time, and then I began able to have the time instead of having to have the news and the world mediated for me by those corporate outlets, go to the documents myself and read the actual documents or interview people, I realized how propagandized and deceived I had been. That not only didn't I have the basic outline of the world, I would have known more had I never read those outlets. And I felt very betrayed and very angry. And that's part of the reason why I think media criticism and offering alternatives to the media is so critical, because I know how much they deceive if you're not. Most people don't have that time and energy of, you have work and you have a family life and you take care of your kids and, and so what I try and, I think all human beings are fallible. I think we're all, we're tribal beings. We have all kinds of temptations. You do your best to fight against them if you have integrity, but you're still susceptible to them. I usually say is like, don't look for who you can trust in the sense that you just believe what this person or this entity tells you because you've decided they're trustworthy. Train yourself to think critically. If someone wants you to believe something, kick the tires on it and make sure you've been shown evidence that appeals to your rational faculties with which we're all endowed before you believe it. And it takes work, but it's mostly emotional and psychological work. It's just training. You don't have to have the luxury of spending all day doing it. You can just say, as long as I don't see evidence for something, I'm going to be skeptical of whether it's true. I'm going to question it. And I'm only going to believe it when somebody convinces me with proof. And I think if you approach everything and everyone with that framework, you will become a much more informed citizen of the world, because now you're engaged with what you're trying to figure out as opposed to just passively receiving it.
Can I jump back into politics again? I like our thread right now, but I have one thing that I just want you to touch on, Glenn. I've been stuck on my observation lately of politicians and people that we're supposed to trust to make decisions for us has been on motivation. And the reason I'm stuck on motivation is because I can't quite figure out why the fuck these people keep lying to us. Like, I keep thinking to myself, wouldn't it just be way easier? And we could cite 30 different examples in the last week here in Canada about how we're being lied to by our officials. And just, have you ever thought about on sort of a grander scale, is there a reason why that guy that we elected thinks that he's getting away with lying to us when it's so blatantly obvious to everybody watching this idiot to, spew this crap to the public?
I think, first of all, I think it has a lot to do with human nature. It was something I learned when I watched then Senator Barack Obama ascend to the presidency. I didn't allow myself to become enamored of him the way a lot of people did, but I felt positively towards him. He was like this outsider figure, kind of the similar appeal of Trump. He wasn't a career politician. And he obviously had a genuine grasp of a lot of things that most people didn't, in terms of being a constitutional lawyer, in terms of being a very harsh critic of the war on terror. And he obviously had like a very potent, once in a generation talent for inspiring people and animating them to become involved, which is what you need if you want to take on power centers. You need a big army of people behind you to do it. And that was the promise of his presidency, was that I'm going to go in and change Washington because I have this huge army of supporters that have never been involved in politics who believe for the first time in the prospect of change. And then he gets into office, and within like the first month, he's continuing every Bush-Cheney war on terror policy that he had vowed to uproot. He's sending his lawyers into court to resist judicial efforts to overturn them. He hires, economists right from Wall Street who serve, Citibank and Goldman Sachs when the 2008 financial crisis hits, and acts to save them at the expense of ordinary citizens. And then you're suddenly wondering to yourself, how is it that you got so fooled? Like, why did I get so deceived? Is he just a fraud? Mm-hmm. And I think that it's not quite that simple. He is a fraud, but I think that it's more than that. It's that this systems of power endure for a reason. They're designed to absorb any effort to subvert them from within. They have safety mechanisms that are built within them so that if you get somebody like an Obama or Trump, who probably on some level has some genuine desire to undermine the way power is distributed and how it expresses itself and functions, they're just all kinds of co-option devices. I was saying earlier, we're tribal beings. I'll give you a quick example. I was the primetime host of MSNBC, the most popular liberal cable outlet in the United States. I was good friends with them for a long time. I used to go on their shows all the time before they were on MSNBC. I was friendly with them. They're very smart people. They used to criticize Democrats all the time, very harshly from the left. One of them, Chris Hayes, wrote a book in 2011 called Twilight of the Elites. And the whole point of it was to coin this new term called cognitive capture, by which he meant that if you immerse yourself in elite institutions, no matter how well-intentioned you are when you enter them, no matter how resolved you are genuinely to subvert them from within, you will inevitably become co-opted by them. You will inevitably start to see the world through the prism that they impose on you because of all the rewards that they have to offer you for doing so and the punishments they dole out if you don't. And I remember I interviewed him about that book when it came out because he was just about to get his show on MSNBC. And I asked him, Chris, you're saying it's inevitable, not like likely, but inevitable that people who enter institutions like this and become immersed get co-opted because of all the way it's just constructed. What are you doing to immunize yourself against that? And he said to me, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. Fast forward 10 years later, and he's one of the most mindless, moronic Democratic Party hacks you will find anywhere in the world. Why is that? It's not because he's consciously lying to anybody and thinking he's this Machiavellian, I'm going to lie to keep my multi-million-dollar contract. Yeah. No, very few people are sociopaths that way, that they can admit that about themselves. It's just that all the people he talks to constantly reinforce the worldview that he's paid to disseminate, and he becomes convinced that it's true. And I think often that is the primary dynamic.
And I think the one that sort of spotlights that would be the Russiagate, right? So, and it was interesting because when I was following all this stuff about Trump and Russia, I kept on thinking to myself, the news organizations are either saying that everything about Russia is a lie or everything about Russia is true. And I was always like, this is impossible. The P tape, and he's been a Russian agent since the 70s and all this stuff. And I was like,
I wouldn't mind the P tape, by the way. If it does exist and you get your hands on it, Glenn, make sure you send me a copy.
But it was impossible to sort of get a gauge on what was really happening, because I hated Trump in the sense that I thought he was even if he represented every issue that I loved, I can't imagine voting for a man like that because he's so self-evidently not qualified for the job of president. And he is, right. So I thought it was weird that that these networks were just, hey, you have a story about Russia? Yeah, but we haven't fact checked it yet. Okay, whatever, let's just run it. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, first of all, let me just note that like when I do shows like this or when I watch them, I usually turn the chat window off, but you have really good commenters and I'm really enjoying them. And the last comment that I see here is, quote, "I'm convinced Chris Hayes has a humiliation fetish," which I would love to comment on. I would really love to comment on that, but instead I'm just going to note it neutrally without opining on it one way or the other.
Noting it neutrally by bringing it up and making an example of it. You do work like we do. That's great.
Yeah.
The only
you don't
comment
have
I decided to platform and read from.
Yeah.
But I have no opinion on whatsoever. I'm totally neutral. I have no opinion whether that's good or bad or right or wrong. Yeah, so like on the Russiagate thing, the amazing thing about the whole Russiagate hysteria is that if you're steeped in left-wing politics, which I was, that was definitely where I kind of came from, right? Like I early on started reading like Noam Chomsky and Izzy Stone, I.F. Stone, who was like the great leftist independent journalist of the Cold War. And as a civil libertarian, the thing that either as a leftist or as just a civil libertarian, as a constitutional lawyer, you regard as the root of all evil is the McCarthy era, which was about nothing other than accusing your political adversaries of being clandestine agents of the Kremlin and fostering a hysteria that the Russians had infiltrated American institutions, had taken over American politics, were clandestinely exercising blackmail over people. That was all what it was about. That's what drove it for a decade. It caused people to commit suicide and it destroyed careers and it almost brought the earth to nuclear annihilation on at least 3 separate occasions. And so in 2016, when I started watching the Hillary Clinton campaign use that as their primary weapon against Trump, they produced this like grainy, dark, menacing ad. What do the Russians have on Donald Trump? What's going on between Donald Trump and the Kremlin? I just had this like instinctive revulsion to it, which I assumed everybody from the center to the center left to the left would share. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was like, who does the Hillary Clinton campaign think they're going to convince with this like crusty, sequel to the McCarthyite script that has been long buried? Mm-hmm. And for some reason, that did not happen. People got convinced because I suppose there's kind of a, I think we are very tribal. Like 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, our survival depended on tribal dynamics and the threat of another tribe attacking us or invading us or infiltrating us was, probably very much on the forefront of our minds. And the people who were most alert to it are probably the ones evolutionarily who survived. And I think our brains are still wired for that. And that kind of script, kind of stimulated that fear. And so for 4 years in the United States, the dominant story was a demented conspiracy theory that Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin had effectively taken over the United States through sexual and financial blackmail of the president, and that somehow the Russians had engaged in this dastardly, never before seen evil by interfering in our sacred democracy through like Facebook bots and Twitter, ads and, like hacking. You're talking about the fucking United States that like when it interferes in other countries, it overthrows leaders with military force. And, whatever the Russians were said to have done was so trivial in the context of billions of dollars spent on these presidential elections. And yet to this very day, Americans are petrified of Russia. They demand that Russia be confronted, even though it's the second largest nuclear power in the country. It just shows you how easily large groups of people, especially when they're already scared from Trump, can be shepherded and herded and propagandized and have their fears and emotions exploited for power and profit.
Also,
Uh,
before you get,
PJ?
also Dean, before you get there, can you tell the Brazilian intelligence agents that are no doubt parked beside your house to shine a flashlight on your face? Because I think you.
You know what? I'm gonna listen. And I'm gonna just move so that there is some light on me because I had to go
Okay.
outside and the sun is going down. So go ahead and keep
Dude,
talking. And
don't worry about it. I want to bring up one more comment because the same guy commented again, and I wanted to show it to you. It's here on the screen. Jimmy Dore said Chris Hayes is a chain-smoking scat muncher, and I'm inclined to agree with him.
I mean, you could definitely write an entire book analyzing Chris Hayes's psychology, and also his relationship to Rachel Maddow. But again, I'm going to go ahead and leave that to your commenters to do.
Well, at least we know it's a platonic relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
So
They look alike. They look like siblings a little bit.
Yeah,
Chris
like
Hayes,
brother and sister. You just have to decide.
imagine it. Imagine it, yeah. Glen Greenwald is our guest. You can get him on Twitter at Glen Greenwald. He's also on Substack. I think you probably are responsible for keeping Substack in business, by the way. And we appreciate you being here. We appreciate you talking to us about some things that are really, really, really fucking hard to understand. Like, you know, in the time that we live in, it's really easy for people to go, I'm on that side or on this side. And I said this the other day. If you've got left or right in your bio, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Right. And we've become such a polarized group of people that it's ideology over ideology. It's extremist over extremist. And when you write or when you're looking for stuff and you're talking about things, are you writing from a tribal perspective? Like, are you on one side or the other? Or are you trying to split the difference and go, hey, where are the facts and how am I going to insert, you know, the truth into a story that represents the facts when people are being tribal in how not only they're receiving the information, but the tribal way which with big media now tries to run the narrative?
I mean, I think because media is so low, it has created an opportunity for people to present a different way of doing journalism and to revitalize the faith that people can have in the belief that journalism can actually inform instead of deceive and mislead and propagandize. And in that collapse of faith and trust in media, which I think is completely justified and valid, I think there are a lot of people who are forging an alternative path of independence outside of the, you know, constraints of these corporate structures that is restoring faith and trust in a lot of ways. And that is one big reason why these media outlets are so intent upon censoring their competitors and their critics on the grounds that they're spreading disinformation and they're engaged in hate speech, because they know that their only hope for survival is if they maintain this kind of monopoly on the dissemination of information. If they have captive audiences that have nowhere else to go, they know that once competitors arise, they're going to be abandoned in droves. It's already happening. Their ratings are already collapsing. Trump, you know, they were actually dying prior to Trump. Trump gave them this 4-year temporary sugar boost. It was kind of like a corpse that was just about in the grave. And then it just got injected with a chemical that made it kind of have a seizures for 4 years and give the appearance that it actually had life. And now that he's gone, it's the dying process, the death process is starting again. And instead of them asking what it is that is causing that to happen and how they can avoid it and improve, they only are trying to cling to their power by censoring and silencing those who are offering alternatives. And I think that shows you how little confidence they have in their own model.
Anderson Cooper's ratings went down 40% or something, I read, between 30 and 40%, like a week or a month after Trump was out of office. Mm-hmm. And I hate to pick on him because it was across the board with a lot of those media outlets, but that is a significant decrease in your numbers, right?
Well, and it's not just, and as Glenn points out too, right? It's not just, CNN, Fox, NBC, MSNBC, CBS. It's not just it's traditional media, right? Like you have had these companies that have been swallowing up traditional media so that they can control the narrative, so they can serve the elite, so they can look out for their best interests, and they're hand in hand with politics. It happens here all the time. We see it all the time. But the funny part is that no one talks about it. We kind of just accept the fact that, that's the government. Oh, that's just, that's CBC or that's CNN. It is what it is until we start pushing back. And Glen's 100% right. And I believe that's where Bill C-10 came from here in Canada. I really do. I believe that had a lot to do with it, Glen. Big media saying, hold it, put everybody like Glen and Dean and James and Lachlan, and let's put them under the same umbrella that we have to operate in. That's impossible to actually, but the thing is that they've done the damage themselves and they don't realize it. But it's not just not embracing tech, but it's embracing the ability to be able to create a narrative that isn't there for your best interest. That's not news, Glen. That's bullshit. It's, as Jim Acosta said the other day, it's not just Fox, it's everybody. They're all bullshit factories, if you ask me.
Yeah. I need to go after this question or another question or two, but I think that a lot of times we talk about confronting power centers, right? Like, so you have these corporate media outlets that exist to serve as propagandists. You have governments and intelligence agencies that don't want any dissent or challenge. And we often don't talk about what that means when we say, let's confront power. And really what it means is if you confront power, they're going to take steps to destroy you or to render you ineffective. That's what it means to be powerful. I think the definition of power is that you can reward people who serve your interest and punish those who impede it. And obviously, if you have this, technology, the internet, that is enabling YouTube programs to find much bigger audiences than cable news shows controlled by corporations like Joe Rogan, who has double or triple the number of people listening to him than even the most popular cable shows, or you have, outlets like Substack or Patreon, where just people who are uncredentialed and uncontrolled can find large audiences. And that becomes a threat to prevailing narratives and the ability to control information. Of course, they're going to try and attack that. Of course, they're going to try and destroy it. They wouldn't be powerful if they didn't. And that's why, I think that when I look at the Edward Snowden work I've done, when I look at the reporting I've done here in Brazil, when I look at the reporting I'm doing now on Substack, it all kind of has that common element to me, which is ultimately what it's about is preserving the ability of people freely to offer dissent and alternatives to power centers without being destroyed. That's why free speech is so important. It's why our free internet is so important. It's because that is what always provides an opportunity to really challenge and change how the prevailing order in society functions. Is as long as you have those spaces that can exist and grow and thrive freely, that's always possible.
Glen,
I know
you have to go, Glen. I just wanted to, first of all, I just want for joining us and
thank you.
You're so principled, and it's kind of an inspiration for guys like me who've been sort of floating around the freelance world and thinking that I always had to impress editors from big media, and you're kind of one of the people that I look up to just keep going on my own. I wanted to know quickly, just I used to get, to answer Lachlan's earlier question, I used to get the news from the Intercept. And I know you guys sort of had a falling out, and if you could quickly just sort of talk about that for a moment, and then just sort of on a fun little tip, are you ever going to go back on Bill? I used to love your exchanges with him, especially about Israel.
Yeah, it's sad what happened at the Intercept. I mean, it was really a great opportunity to create what could have been a outlet. And yet, the reason why we were so excited is because oftentimes outlets that exist to have dissent, usually people with a lot of money don't want to fund them. And because we were at the peak of the Snowden report, it had so much energy and credibility, and we had so much leverage, and that's when we created it. We were able to get, one of the world's richest people to really become dedicated to funding it, and it just all got squandered. For reasons similar to what I was describing earlier, which is that once the Trump era happened, there was so much cultural and social pressure on people who live in liberal enclaves to prove that they were on the right side, dedicated to, stopping Trump at all costs, even if it meant abandoning independence and journalistic integrity and dissent, that the people who were running it and editing it just threw the original vision off to the side, and it became like any other liberal outlet, which is why I ended up leaving. As far as Bill Maher is concerned, I would go back on his show. We had some, really sharp exchanges. And people think he stopped inviting me on after that, but to his credit, he didn't. He still invited me on. I even went on a couple times after one of our biggest fights over Israel and Palestine and his views on Islam and Muslims. Once the pandemic is over and I'm able to travel again, I'm sure I can go back on that show.
Nice.
Glenn, listen, buddy, we appreciate you being here. I'll send you off with one more comment. This is, if Chris Hayes comes to find his wife in bed with another man, he would probably apologize for interrupting and ask if they wanted milk and cookies when they're finished. That was for you, bud.
He's got no
I was
comment.
trying so hard to resist focusing on that comment. I had seen it as well, and you guys are clearly doing that. But that is a nice note to end on. I really appreciate it.
Glenn, continued great work. Really appreciate the work you do. Thank you for having the courage to do it, and keep it up. We're big fans.
Thanks, you guys. Really appreciate it. Good talk.
Thanks, Glenn.
Take care. There you go. Glenn Greenwald on the program.
Holy
That was
shit.
Talk to
so
people hate Chris
satisfying.
Hayes.
That was so satisfying, guys. Like listening to a journalist talk like a real journalist, for once.
God, that was unbelievable. Like
Isn't it amazing the difference between a guy that doesn't have to answer to a corporate master and a guy that doesn't? It's just amazing.
That's no. That's different level. I've never heard somebody break down stuff like Glenn. Like his explanation of Trump and the last 4 years, he did that in 3 minutes? It made more sense than anything I've heard since Trump was even a thing. It just summarized the entire 4 years. And he did it without a script. He just
in
ripped
6
it
minutes.
off.
Yeah.
Like it's since he's off the charts, smart.
Yeah.
And I hate to get into an argument with him. How would you even why would you even bother?
I was thinking that when I was listening to him. I'm like, his husband probably loses every discussion, right? Because you're sitting there talking to this guy that makes all kinds of sense in a space where we're really desperate for sense, right? We're desperate to try and make sense of the whole Trump thing. We're trying to make sense of the pandemic and misinformation and who's right and who's wrong. And he said something in there that really reinforced, and it's something I've done with my kids where they've all said to me, "Hey, Dad, well, we don't know what to believe." So I got friends that are telling me masks are stupid. I got friends that are telling me that they aren't. And I'm like, guys, if you want information, you got to go to the source, which is what Glenn was saying, is you can't just be satisfied with turning on the news and accepting the news anymore. Jamesy, you got to go in and do the work. You got to find source material. If you have questions, you need to go and read. 2 of my very good friends this week got vaccinated. 4 or 5 months ago, they were both ultimate anti-vaxxers, anti-movement. This is a joke. I don't think this is serious at all. And through a litany of conversations, which I just kept saying, here's some source material. Read this. I don't want to have any part in your decision-making. Both of them went and got vaccinated yesterday. And one person said to me on the phone today, I'm just really thankful that I don't believe any of that shit anymore.
Yeah.
And that's because you encourage them to go to the source. And that's what Glenn's talking about. Sorry, James.
No, that's okay. But the only negative ancillary kind of issue that raises is that consumers of news have to become sort of quasi-reporters, because there's no media outlet that's trusted enough to do the heavy lifting and to give us the truth. Now we all have to put on our little reporter caps and do the work ourselves. And I think that is kind of an issue, because people have lives, man. Like, people don't have time to go and find dossiers and documents and do all that kind of stuff. They need a media outlet that will do that for them. And that's why Blackball Media is there for you. No, but you know what I mean? Like, that's I'm writing opinion columns right now.
Yeah.
So
James,
really
that was great. We should almost highlight that as the best whoring that's ever happened on the Dean Blundell Show pod.
I smell a clip.
Fantastic.
He wants a clip so bad. He wants a promo so bad because we could put on promos, and it's like, and I'll get a text. Just wondering if this is a bit now, right? Like this is a thing. You guys are just fucking with.
That's
me
what
now,
I
right?
thought.
Like the
I was looking at all the clips and I was like, Lachlan.
It's totally a thing now.
Yeah. We were actually talking about this before you came on. We're like, we should do another clip where we like just
cut me out as I start talking.
Yeah, just cut you up, but like make it noticeable that we've cut you out.
Or my idea was to just start putting like really bad clips of me up where I make no fucking sense and it's not funny.
That's what we're already doing.
But what
I
a,
love
what
you,
a fucking,
James. I
what a,
love you too. Lachlan.
That interview came courtesy of Jamesy, by the way.
Oh, holy shit,
showrunner.
man. I don't know how you pulled that out of your ass, but that was unbelievable. That hands down was, I've never been in a room with a man that smart. Not in my entire life. He is Dean, you're very smart, and I thought maybe you might have been the smartest guy I'd ever met.
Now.
And you're falling down the list, buddy.
What the fuck?
James, you're a close third. You're quite intelligent.
Listen, James brought up a good point when we started the conversation. This was the exchange he was referring to when we said we were going to have Glen on. Put out an announcement this morning. I started out impressed way back during the Snowden drops, but since then he's turned into something awful. I tried watching more of his stuff. I just won't. May as well have Jordan Peterson on next. And James and I replied to him a couple times. He's principled, and you can't stand it because you have confused ideologies for principles. But you're a fucking 100% right. Like people that are used, the Fox News people, they love getting information that feeds them and their tribe, right? The CNN people, same thing. In Canada, who fucking knows? Everybody.
I don't know what we are.
We don't have and that's the thing is in Canada. We have very soft versions of what they have in the United States, right?
And we got loud versions of
what they have in the United
States. At the right
States.
and the left, right?
Yeah, like the rebels and all that bullshit.
Yeah, you have, but it's just not.
No, but it. My point is this, and James, correct me if I'm wrong. You've worked in media for a long time. I've worked in media for a long time. I've worked for big media. What Glen is saying is true. And what we've been saying is true. You cannot trust any of them. And I fucking feel weird saying that because I feel like I'm buying into the conspiracy. I feel like I'm one of those guys that says you can't believe everything you read, which kills me to say it. But the truth of the matter is, and if you watched everything play out with Bill C-10, you know it to be true. Like, you know it's true.
The thing is that when you look at the Canadian media landscape, everyone now is trying to, like, CBC is basically MSNBC now, right? They come at it from an ideological perspective. They don't come at it from the truth. When I was referencing that the back and forth that Glen had with Bill Maher, all that was Glen talking about both sides and the issues that Bill Maher wasn't talking about. Bill Maher is very pro-Israel. He's always like, what are you going to do if you're a country surrounded by enemies and all that kind of stuff. And all Glen did was mention what the Palestinians go through on a day-to-day basis because of the Israeli military. He wasn't saying anything that was false, but he dared to talk about a side that Bill Maher wasn't championing. And that created that conflict on air. And it's funny because
balls taking on Bill Maher. All right. I mean, he's smart.
He's smart, but he's also, there's certain issues that basically, all in and not very objective about. And Israel just happens to be one of them. I decided a long time ago that I was never going to write about Israel because they're the way that Dean feels about certain subjects of identity politics. I feel that way about Israel because there's just no way that you're going to write a piece and not get hate from one side or the other, right?
I was watching that Snowden movie today, and they were talking about who they shared the leaked information, right? They figured they had like 3.5 billion accounts and phone numbers just in the United States that they were surveying on a daily basis. And the first person they shared those with was Israeli Mossad, like Secret Service in Israel. Right. Yeah. And listen,
I remember that.
And I get what James is saying. Like, I don't take on the idea that, maybe the Palestinians are being treated to apartheid. Well, that's exactly what's happening. Right. So it's, and it's as racist and religious. I don't give a fuck. But that's, that they've got them blocked in. They lock this group of people and they treat this group of people like shit. Now they keep throwing bombs over the fence. And then they get invaded, and it happens every few years. but talking about it as a zero-sum policy. Whereas a guy like Glen Greenwald can go into the mouth of the beast and say, how about go fuck yourself? Because this is the reality on the ground.
You know what I like about Glen? And again, I think if I spend some time looking into things that Glen has written, and I might actually now, because I'm coming at this from a much less of a educated standpoint than you, James. I mean, you've known this guy for years. You've read a lot of his stuff, and you've followed him for quite some time. Whereas I kind of know him as the Snowden guy, right? But the thing that I found interesting was his thoughtfulness on his presentation to the audience, right? As opposed to this conversation that we constantly have in the media and have had for years, that you have to have a balanced sort of presentation. He was thinking of it not so much from balance, but how much can this audience take? And I find that kind of refreshing, because even on my show, which is 3 fucking idiots on the air, we're constantly trying to make sure that if I overstep the boundaries on one issue, somebody will reel you back in. And that all that is protectionism. We're just trying to put up walls around ourselves to protect ourselves from complaints. If I go off on religion, somebody in the room has to go, come on, Locke. And as soon as that happens, what ends up happening is it deflates that individual who's in the car's sense of, I gotta go write a fucking letter. Because what we do is we pile on. If we keep piling on, you're just going to inflame that guy, and you're going to end up with complaints. But so the way the media has been structured over the years has been this, and CBC, you brought up CBC. This is why I started thinking about it, because they spend more time thinking about how to represent all the sides than they actually do worrying about whether or not anything is true. Whereas Glen's approach seems to be, all right, I got all this truth. How much can this audience take? How much can I jam up their ass over the next? Can you
imagine? Sorry, I want to hear what James has to say. But can you imagine having access to all that truth and being the guy who has to decide if the public's actually ready for it? That's another part of it.
I think what Glen was referring to, I think it was you, Dean, that asked him that question about whether or not there was certain information. I think I'm paraphrasing, but with certain information that he wouldn't release because it might cause endanger like a spy or whatever. That was especially poignant when WikiLeaks would release all of their documents that they had. They often would just release it. And I think it did blow the cover of one agent, but they've never proven that it's caused any death. But I think he was really talking about that kind of stuff. I don't think Glen Greenwald is holding back stories because the public can't handle the truth. I think he would hold back.
No. That wasn't my point, James. It just, I liked the fact that he actually thinks about it. That it is something that he recognized, and he spoke quite eloquently about the fact that he does think about that.
Yeah.
Are people ready for this?
What I was going to say, though, about what's also kind of refreshing about is that that when he turned on the laptop just now, that if you happen to be in his backyard with him and his dogs and you started talking about the same subject, he would sound exactly the same. He's just being himself. He's the product of a guy who never had to answer to an asshole editor. Shows by the way that he reports, It's very interesting because of he was talking about his trajectory. Notice how he never mentioned that his trajectory included being handed stories to write from someone up high. He's always decided what he's had to do.
James, can't have bosses.
Trust me, I know. You know what I mean? I know that,
because you also can't have jobs.
By the way, I wanted at the front end of that, I wanted to put a bet on the table to see if anybody would take it. No, not JK. To see if one of his dogs would take a shit while he was on the pod with us. Yeah.
Sure.
No, we were gonna ask him if he was familiar with Ron Weasley's character and what he thought of him.
What do you think of Dumbledore?
Yes,
Dumbledore.
It's Dumbledore.
You know what? He might be.
I'm sorry.
It's possible that he was one of the ones that might say that that she was out of line, a little bit. I don't know.
Well, I can't believe you didn't ask the question. You fucking idiot.
I didn't want to get.
You didn't. Jesus, thank God.
That's it. You know what? I'm done being your showrunner. I'm gonna get Nardbar, and then I'm done.
Hardware. Can't wait.
We have to get the human serviette on. Come on,
boys. Appreciate you doing this. James, thanks for setting that up. James DeFiore from blackballmedia.ca. We've got big news, folks. James's first podcast, if I'm not mistaken, it's Thursday. Blackballed the podcast with James DeFiore is Thursday with the greatest activist in the history of activists, who Glen Greenwald is not just a fan of, follows, Noam Chomsky.
He brought him up, didn't he?
They're friends, actually, right? They're I think they're friends now. Yeah. I'm really excited. You know, I've consumed so much last month. Like, you know, I feel like I'm ready to sort of peer in. I also want to do an interview with him that is not like every other interview that I've seen over the last couple of years that he's done. And, you know, maybe get some new sound bites that people haven't had yet. But at the same time, you know, I know he's just put a book out that he co-wrote, and it's all about the environment. So I know he's going to want to talk a lot about that. But, you know, it's a great way to launch a podcast. Like, I'm really excited. I'm very grateful.
Shit,
you know?
James. Jesus. Yeah. Good for you.
We are too. I know it'll be great, and I'm really looking forward to it. So look for that
Proud
at
of you, man.
Blundell.com in the
Thank
next 2 days, and we'll have more information for you. It's going to be on Thursday.
We're not going to go on Thursday, are we? We're going to hand over that day to James, or are we still
Actually,
going? What are we doing?
Thursday we have Noam Chomsky on my show, and then we have Deborah So on later on, and I think we have someone else that day too, don't we?
Well, I'm trying to figure out what we do with Bonzi.
No. We have
Put
listen.
Bonzi on with Noam.
No, after Deborah So, we have Nathaniel Erskine Smith to talk about Bill C-10.
Oh yeah, that's on Thursday. So we got Noam Chomsky, we got sex doctor Deborah So. Is that her name? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, it's not Sandra Oh, it's Deborah So.
Deborah So, and then right after that we got Nate Erskine Smith. Great guy, politician, but he's actually a good politician.
I like Nate.
Yeah, he's great.
I actually I've decided I hate all politicians, but I like Nate.
He's going to talk about Bill C-10.
He just had a last weekend with Michael Geist, who's a professor at University of Ottawa, I think, and he's basically the nation's foremost intellectual when it comes to internet law. So he's going to talk to on Monday. So it's going to be interesting to see what he has to say about the new changes to C-10. I'm so excited, guys.
Smarter.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Like,
let's not get too smart. It'll start being obvious how dumb I am.
Dude, we got the sex doctor.
That's why I don't watch fucking Jeopardy. I don't need any other fucking proof on how dumb I am. Like, I don't need a television show.
With Deborah So, I'm opening with the J.K. Rowling question. And then I'm going to go like this as she fucking schools both of you. Like this, just like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's amazing.
Go ahead, because I finally actually want an answer to that question. I'm going to ask her about the sorting hat that they use to put people in Gryffindor or Slytherin.
They should call that the gender hat. Penis. Oh my God, the gender hat.
And why my balls dip in the water now at 50 when I sit on the toilet. It
is
doesn't
there
even need to be a warm day. It doesn't even need to be a warm day anymore.
Deborah, is there any way we can get corrective surgery for long balls? Yes or no?
And is it called a sack jack?
It has to be
or is that something else?
It's a
tuck. By the way, don't Google that.
It's a tuck.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Dean.
All right.
Thank you, James. You soon. Good fucking pull on Glenn.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, Glen Greenwald. I just shut myself off. Now I'm back. Glen Greenwald on Twitter, Substack as well. Fucking great guy. Can't wait to have him back. Hopefully he comes back. Probably come back. 10 out of 10 interview. Can't not come back. Thanks to Lachlan Cross and our friends over at 95.7 Cruise FM for allowing him to come on again in Edmonton. He's the host of the Locker Room morning show in Edmonton. Listen to it. Fucking awesome. And James DeFiore, blackballmedia.ca is where you can find him as well. Thanks to our sponsors, Blue Microphones, at Blue Microphones on Twitter, bluemic.com. Go there today and check out everything that they have to make this so much easier. So much easier. MoFi headphones, use them every day. They're incredible. They're Grammy Award winning. Sound awesome. I sound incredible. I don't think I've ever sounded better, to be honest with you. And you can also get these USB Blue Yeti mics. Plug them right into your computer. No dicking around. There's a full complement of stuff, though. Go check them out. Really proud that we're part of the Blue crew. Blue Microphones. Go and check them out today online. BlueMic.com. Thanks to our friends at Easy Auto Financial. Super easy to get approved for a loan. Not only do they approve you, they've got subprime leasing and subprime financing. If you've got a terrible credit rating, if you've got a good credit rating, that's fine too. They don't care. They just want to match you up with the car that you want and the financing that you need. They do everything for you. EasyAutoFinancial.ca. Black Rose Organics, our official cannabis partner. Right now, when you go to shop.blackroseorganics.com, you can actually get your medical license on the front page of their site. It's super easy to do. It took me like 5 minutes. Take you 5 minutes. Super easy. You need a health card? That's it. Someone calls you. Oh, yeah, you're approved. Boom. Then you get the medical cannabis. That's where you want to be, the medical cannabis. They do better medical cannabis than anybody else. Medical cannabis at a better price. 30% garlic sherbet, 30% THC. They've got this unbelievable garlic jelly as well. You got to try it. It's a JMO. They call it the JMO. Flowers out of this world. And if you're a cannabis user and a medical user, not only can you port your license there, you can actually get your license there. Go to shop.blackroseorganics.com. $199 fee for their membership. Half price ounces for the rest of your membership. For the rest of the year, half price with the medical. Super easy. And Gitch from Ed's Fine Imports has it. Luxury underwear, boxer briefs, got a pouch in the front. Super duper for your sack, fellas. You'll love them. So will she. You'll look like $1 million with these things on. But Gitch, Gitch, then the number 3, that is your promo code. Go to edsfineimports.com. When you buy 3, he'll send you another for free with that promo code. Gitch3 is your promo code. I think that's it. Sign up for a newsletter, deanblundell.com. Thanks to Glen. Thanks to everybody for being part of the show. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. And we'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, we will. Nick Kyprios will be on the show tomorrow. Yeah, Stanley Cup champ, former Leaf, Nick Kyprios. Ooh, we'll talk about Tom Wilson. Was it dirty? Was it not dirty? It's pretty dirty. Anyway, see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.
Not Woods.
Oh shit. I think we need to hear that.